Hey everyone, this is Lisa from Life in Layouts and welcome back to day number 23 of March Madness. Today's page map sketch comes from January of 2014. I pulled out the Passport to Japan kit from Kellybell Designs to document some photos of Eli's birthday. I wanted to show you the discrepancy in these two pieces of paper. The paper that's on the back is the cardstock and the paper that's on the front is the presentation paper. You can definitely see it with that brown paper. And I will tell you that these two pieces of paper were printed with the same information from the computer. I told both of them to print at high quality using borderless print, and they were both told to print on photo paper. I was struggling with the presentation paper because it was leaving like paper dust on my mat. So I switched over to the cardstock paper, but I was having a lot of issues with the colors just not being right. I did purchase this particular presentation paper and it is not double-sided. The presentation paper that I did in my review was double-sided and this one was a little bit cheaper, so I thought, why not try this one to see if it works? With it not being double-sided, it is super thin, like copy paper thin, and I thought that I wouldn't use it. Because this paper was thin, I thought that I would cut out the paper a second time with just plain white cardstock. And then I was going to adhere the two pieces together. So I have the presentation paper at top and then the cardstock behind it, giving it a little bit more weight. This is the only layout that I do this on because this was so tedious, and at the end I felt like I really didn't need it. I am always going to use a heavyweight cardstock for my base layout. That's going to give me the structure that I need. And I thought about it when I was creating the flower and garden layout using the My Mind's Eye lime twist. That paper is also very thin. At that point, I was like, you know what? I have already purchased this presentation paper. I understand that it's thin. I use My Mind's Eye paper that's also thin, so I'm just gonna use it up. Once I'm done, I'll make a decision as to whether I want to continue using the presentation paper, going back to the double-sided presentation paper because it is a little bit thicker and I do prefer that one. Just foregoing the fact that I'll probably have to replace my mats multiple times. I just like the way that the presentation paper prints more than I do any of the other cardstocks that I used. So I did a lot of rambling there to tell you a little bit about this paper, but I wanted to give you guys my honest opinions. I still feel like I am learning a lot about digital printing and hybrid scrapbooking. I'm really enjoying having the versatility that I've had by using Kellybell Designs content, and I knew that it was going to be a little bit of trial and error to figure out what was the best way to print at home since I've never done that before. I don't print my photos at home. I do prefer to have them printed at a local store. I use Walgreens. I could probably send these papers out to print at like Staples or something like that, but I just feel like the amount of layouts that I want to get done and the turnaround time, I don't want to continue running out to the store to pick those up. There's not an office supply store close to me. Kind of the downside of living in a small town, I do have to travel a little bit to get anywhere. So that just means that I need to figure out how I can do that by printing at home. And that may mean that I need to purchase several different types of paper to try to figure it out. Right now, I am sticking with the presentation paper because I do prefer the way that that prints. The vibrancy of these colors is just phenomenal. And as you saw at the beginning of the video, I'm hoping that the video showcases the color differences, especially with that brown. It's just hands down better with the presentation paper. So as I was rambling on, I was doing the exact same thing that I've been doing this entire month. I was layering up my page starter as well as my word flare that I'm going to use for my title. These photos were of Eli's birthday. I feel like I did a lot of birthday celebration layouts this month. I think that they were easy to mass plan since they were easy photos to pull out. But we do other things at Disney as opposed to just celebrating birthdays. If you were to look at just the layouts that I created this month, you would think maybe that that's all we do is eat at Disney, which we do eat a lot at Disney, but it's not everything we do. I did make a mistake with the H of the hibachi. It wasn't large enough to double up, so I did have to reprint that, which was such a bummer because that was the only thing that I had to reprint. So it was one letter on an 8.5 by 11, and you can't really run those back through the printer. So now that I've got all of my embellishments layered up, I'm going to start to cut out my photos and put this layout together. I have several photos on this layout. I did have to pull out some flip flaps to make sure that I was able to capture all of the photos without it being overwhelming. I was able to get a total of 12 photos on the layout with those 2 flip flaps. For one of the flip flaps, I'm going to have Eli and Nicholas flat down to the layout. They are actually on the balcony of the restaurant looking out into Epcot as we were waiting for our table. And then in that flip flap is going to be Eli's mocktail, as well as Eli and Nicholas also before we went into the restaurant in the little picture window. The other flip flap, I'm going to have the plate of food where the chef made a smiley face with some hair with the noodles. And then in the flip flap, I'm going to have the zucchini, carrot, Mickey head that he created for us. And then the photo that's going to be on the top of that flip flap is where the chef made a Mickey head with the spoon and the butter. I'm going to have one of the flip flaps flipping down and one of them flipping up. I like to have the flip flaps going in different directions to give it a little bit more interest. I decided to use a light gray for my background, and I'm going to start out with this yellow paper. I did print 2 of them so that I could span it across both sides of the layout. And I'm going to cut the yellow paper where there is 1.5 inches at the top, and then the rest of it is going to be down at the bottom. I am going to cover up that seam with this brown paper. There are times in the video where the brown looks like there are different variations of the coloring, but I can tell you that in person it doesn't look that way. I'm not sure why it looks that way on the video, but it is solid brown in real life. I am laying out my photos, trying to decide where I can cut that brown paper because I want the brown paper to span the entire layout, just like the sketch calls for. Once I got the photos down, I realized that I forgot to add the title, and I had to bring that in and move my photos down so that I had enough room for the title as well as the photos. And then I'm going to lay my page starter over on the far right hand side, and I'm going to lay out my layouts as I have designed it in Silhouette Studio. Like I've mentioned before, I do design all of my layouts in Silhouette Studio before I print them out so that I make sure that I have all of the sizes pretty proportionate to the layout. I didn't do that when I first started creating the digital layouts. My very first layout, which was Splash Mountain, my Splash Mountain car was so large. So I knew that I have to plan it out. And it does take a little bit more to plan it out first before I actually create the layout. But when I do sit down to create the layout itself comes together pretty quickly. I pulled out my bottle caps because you guys know that I am definitely in my bottle cap phase right now. I added just 1 bottle cap to this layout. Up in the upper right hand corner, I added the word Japan to the white bottle cap. I then remembered that I wanted to add this blue paper as well, and those are the 3 pieces of paper that I'm going to use, that yellow, the brown, and the blue. I did pull out my border punch to add a border to the blue paper, and then I'm going to ink up the blue paper. You do have to treat the paper a little bit different than you would any manufacturer paper, just simply because you're printing at home. And I prefer the look of having the edges inked with the paper that I print at home. So now that I have everything kind of roughly planned out on the layout, I'm going to go ahead and adhere everything down. I added the yellow paper to the top, and then I decided that I would add the blue paper directly to the brown paper because I knew that I had to cut both of these in half to span the layout. So I wanted to make it easy on myself to actually do that. Once I got one of them laid out, I laid the blue paper on top of the paper that I had already adhered together and used that as a guide to adhere the other blue paper so that they have the same border at the top. I decided to add the yellow paper 1 inch from the bottom, and then I'm going to again add my photos and my title to the layout so that I can figure out where to cut my brown paper. Once I get the brown paper cut out, I'm going to go ahead and adhere the brown paper to the far left-hand side of the layout, as well as adding it to the right. Then I'm going to test out my photos again, making sure that I have them all in place. And I will tell you that the frozen layout has scared me a little bit in regards to cutting out my paper, because I can't tell you how many times I tested out the placement of these things before I made any cuts. Once I got the photo down of the building, I was adding the title and I realized that I forgot another thing that I wanted to add. The sketch calls for a circle piece behind the title, and so I also had print out this gray paper that I knew that I was going to use for the circle. Once I got that down, then it was pretty easy to lay my title down. And the gray circle had covered up where I needed to cut the brown paper. I decided to trim down the photo of Eli with his birthday hat, just so that I had more room for the bamboo over on the left-hand side. I also decided to add that photo up on Fun Foam. So the photo on the left obviously is Eli with his birthday hat. Then we have the photo of the building and the photo of the boys looking out from the balcony. Down at the very bottom is a selfie that I took with all of us right when we sat down, so we still have our menus in front of us. And I wanted to make sure that we got a picture of everybody because I knew that once we got the dinner started, it was all going to be about the chef. I then started to build up the clusters by adding the different pieces that I had printed out. And once I got them laid down where I thought I would like them, I started to adhere everything down. Eli is definitely into anime and Japanese culture as well as Chinese culture. There's several anime shows that he watches and really enjoys. So I knew that this restaurant was going to be a restaurant that he was going to want for his birthday this particular year. We have a restaurant similar to this that we eat at on a regular basis that's outside of Disney, but it was so fun to have that Disney flair to it that we're obviously not going to get at just a regular restaurant. Once I got everything down on the left-hand side of the layout, I started to work on the right-hand side using my T-square ruler to make sure that I could get everything straight, which, of course, I had to struggle a little bit with that for the yellow paper on the right. For the right-hand side of the layout, obviously I have that photo of the smiley face that the chef made for us. I got a photo of Eli taking a big bite of his food. And then I also have a picture of the Olaf onion. If you have ever done a hibachi, most of the time they will do a onion volcano and they will set that volcano on fire. This one did Olaf, and he actually sang, "Do you want to build a snowman?" which I thought was hilarious. I do have several video clips that I took during our dinner. I have uploaded them to YouTube, and I will be adding a QR code to the layout. I did do this off camera, so you're not going to see it here, but I will have the video linked at the end of this video if you would like to check it out. But having the chef sing, "Do you want to build a snowman?" with his Olaf onions was just so cute. Once I started laying down the photos on the right-hand side of the layout, I had these two photos here, and I didn't want them to be butted up to each other, but I needed them to be butted up to each other to cover up that hole. So to solve that problem, I decided to back those two photos on that gray paper that I used on the left-hand side for the circle. This allowed me to have a little bit of space between the photos, but still allowed me to cover up the gap of that brown paper. I did decide to lay both of those photos down flat to the layout, and I laid down the other two photos, making sure that I had enough space for both of them. Before I added that last photo of us down, I decided to go ahead and add the page starter down first so that I made sure that I had enough space for that, and then I could have the photo of us with our dessert above the page starter. I did decide to put that photo up on Fun Foam as well. I then started working on the cluster that's up at the top right-hand side. I added these lanterns as well as the fan and then that bottle cap that says Japan. I did have a few other pieces that I had planned out on my Silhouette Design Studio, but then once I got it down, I just didn't feel like I needed them, and those are up at the top of my layout. I also added a flare that says Hibachi Fun, and I had printed out another bamboo, and I wasn't going to use it, but then I thought, well, I have the bamboo in the lower left, so by just adding a little tiny piece that's sticking out, it will tie those two clusters together. Of course, I did struggle with it because I wanted it behind all the other pieces, and all of those pieces were already glued down. I did decide to add the blue lantern over to the far left in my title cluster. I added it behind the Mickey ears as well as the red lantern. I then pulled out some brown enamel dots and I added those around the layout. And then I pulled out this red flourish. It's really large, but I do decide to cut it up into much smaller pieces and add it to several different areas around the layout. I first started by adding 2 different pieces in my page starter, and then I added one that almost looks like a complete circle to the title cluster, and I like how it's coming off of the Mickey hat. And then I struggled with this one because I was starting to get down to the pieces that really weren't flourishes, they were more just like swishes. So I did end up adding that one to the top right, and then I found one little small one to add to the left-hand side. I then pulled out my red bling and decided to add it to the center of that white flower, as well as the bottom part of the page starter. And then I decided to add the red bling to each one of the clusters. I then thought about adding these really tiny ones to the chopsticks in the title. They are super tiny, but that red accent just adds the perfect touch to it. I then pulled out my green color box and added some green enamel dots. These have like a gloss feel to them. They're really pretty, and there is no adhesive on the back. So I did have to use my liquid adhesive to add to the back of them to make sure that they stuck. And the last thing that I added to the layout was a yellow enamel dot to the yellow flower in my page starter. And then that is it for this video. Here is my final layout as well as some close-ups. I did do my journaling offline, and it says, for Eli's birthday celebration this year, we enjoyed lunch at Epcot. He is a big fan of hibachi and felt quite grown up sipping his mocktail. Our chef was fantastic, especially with his creative take on the onion Olaf. All right, if you enjoyed this video, if you wouldn't mind giving me a thumbs up, I would really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already and you want to see more double page layout inspiration, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope that you have a scrappy day.